Welcome to Planet Now, where it's all about the people, places, things, and ideas that teach us, prompt us to make a difference, and do more with what life presents. We're still talking about grief. Sometimes it starts with the loss of a loved one. Then it leads to other points of sadness. Sometimes it takes a while to get back on track and a lot of internal work. It is not for the faint of heart, and my next guest has walked that path. Jackie Fuller is a media professional in my network, and I caught wind of her story during some of our conversations and decided to invite her on the show. Loss finds us all, and Jackie shares the first huge loss that she grappled with, turns out with for decades. Loss finds us all, and Jackie shares the first huge loss that she ended up grappling with for decades before encountering healing. And that loss influenced other areas of her life.
My first real, experience with grief was when my maternal grandmother passed in January of 1988. I was about 9 years old, still really didn't have a concept of what death meant other than with the basics that people tell you that your grandmother passed away, she's in heaven now, that kind of thing. And, it's just kind of, it's like the thing is like not being able to see this person anymore alive and well. And my grandmother was like a mother figure to me. So this was about the closest thing about life, I would say, to having a mother, and then losing that person who provided a lot of the nurturing and the guidance and teaching me right from wrong, helping me with homework, things like that. That core person was no longer there. And trying to process and understand that grief, seeing the person in a casket and, going through the whole journey of, the death process of them being buried. I knew I was sad and all that, but it didn't hit me really until like this person is no longer there. You can't talk to them anymore. You're not going to get the hugs anymore, like that nurturing spirit. So that was my first core experience with dealing with grief. And even with that at the time, I didn't fully know how to process it.
How did it happen? Was it sudden? Had she been going to the hospital?
She was a diabetic. And I think, with a lot of diabetics, sometimes they have wounds, physical wounds they can't heal. So I think with the issue of her leg not being able to heal properly, kind of evolved into other health problems she was dealing with. And then eventually she just passed away. That was my interpretation. One thing kind of kicked off other things.
And what did you hear the other grown-ups in your circle saying?
In regards to her passing, I guess because of the age being 9, I really didn't hear it. But I was aware about diabetes just from general knowledge back then, and how people do die from conditions and people get their leg amputated. I wonder sometimes with my grandmother, that was a fear of hers about getting her leg amputated. So she tried to do her best to properly heal her wounds in her way. But I think sometimes even with wounds, of course, now being an adult, I look back, I wonder if she would have just kind of rested her legs more and allowed her leg to heal properly. Maybe that could have done something of a difference. I don't know. But I think it sounds like probably some other things kind of kicked off in addition to her dealing with the wound.
Now, so since your grandma passed and you were so young, how long did it take for you to reconcile that grief? Because from what I understand in our previous conversations, it took a span of time.
Of course, it became a lingering thing in the back of in my mind because of the whole fear of loss thing. So I wasn't fully able to make the connection with all the dots until I did a life coaching session, and I mentioned to the life coach about not wanting to get married because I didn't want to experience that kind of grief again of losing someone. 2023 was when that revelation, that clicked, when she said to me, your grandmother would want you to find, someone to be happy with in your life versus you being buried in your work and things like that. So it hit me where I was like, yeah, what I'm doing emotionally isn't healthy because I'm putting up barriers so I wouldn't get hurt again. That was a deep hurt. So I'm like, I don't want to go through that. That whole idea of people you care about leaving you freaked me out, probably somewhere subconsciously, where it started to play out in relationships, not only maybe with family members, friends, romantic relationships.
How did it play out with friends? And then we can go to the romance part.
Well, just having solid, good friends that had that, like, I would say probably like an unconditional love, serious support, like want to make sure that I do well, succeed. So it could be like friends, mentors in my life over the years, that kind of thing. Because I look back and I said, wow, I lost a lot of people. Well, to me, it's a lot of people who who truly had a vested interest in me and my well-being. And then when you have those times in your life, who can you go to? These people are no longer here that you had built this relationship with, and either they are no longer here with us.
And so along the way, of course, life's, and it keeps going and it keeps moving, regardless of where we are and what we're going through. But that doesn't lessen the importance of what we're going through and the stages that we are at any given moment. So how did the idea of losing your grandma, did that put any barriers as far as friendships are concerned? Because it sounds like you had a circle of friends, but did that affect you in any way? Or was the fact that you had these really good friends and then, you started losing friends and mentors along the way, did that compound what you felt about your grandmother?
Similar connection, but not exactly, because I think my grandmother is like that family member. So that's the core foundation. And then it will be like your village, your tribe, right? So versus like that person that was in your house and around you every day, your friends, come and go. I mean, some friends aren't good friends you want to have around and they need to go, right? You need to stay away from them, just being real. But the ones that usually had that and I would say more so they were older friends, like I said, the mentor types, right? I should clarify that. The mentor types, those are the ones that kind of stepped in and played kind of that role of being that mentor, that go-to person that I no longer had with my my grandmother around.
Okay.
So I would say the older friends. I'll clarify that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. More senior.
Yeah.
And so now, how did that affect your relationships? Because it's not like you didn't have relationships. It's not like you didn't have any romance in your life. Let's be clear on that. That was present. But how did that affect, like that fear of loss, affect your romantic relationships?
Well, I think it became a general thing where, people who are important to you that you really care about is eventually going to leave you anyway. And I see now how that is now with people I've dealt with when this flipped the script. But it was that fear loss, same thing. You could be in a good relationship, but just something make crazy happen that may be out of your control. You know what I mean? More so, I guess, being out of your control, like a death or maybe some other kind of separation that's out of my control, out of our control in life. So I think that was more of it. Just like, you just want to feel like sometimes you have someone to help guide you and help you have a solid foundation as you grow. But it's kind of like, it's kind of was like this. People you couldn't trust, people who just didn't show up to be present like they needed to be.
These
Those
are
kind of
romantic
scenarios.
people?
It doesn't have to be. It could be family, friends, romantic, all the above. People, people and their behavior. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that definitely impacted a whole lot of your life. What about your relationship with your mom? Because you said that you lived with your grandma. What happened with your mom, and how did that impact your heroine's grief journey, if you want to call it that? Because it's kind of like a hero's journey, if you really want to find that healing. The thing is funny
because, that theme's been happening a lot lately, especially. But it's interesting because, I wasn't aware that my mother had a mental illness, right? It was just, I just figured like she was that lady that was in New York and she came to visit whenever, right? When she could. I was not aware that during that time in my youth, when she was in New York, she was battling her own variations of mental illness. But for the most part, our relationship was cordial. She was still kind of, and to this day, unfortunately, she's still kind of a stranger to me. I think that's hard for her to accept. But when she moved down here, I want to say 1990, I think it was like 1990, I figured, okay, here's an opportunity to be able to bond with someone, because we're in a society where mothers are revered. So it's like, now it's time to okay, now here's your mother here. And
It's like a whole
Um,
day dedicated to them every
yeah,
May.
yeah. So now we will get to, probably now be able to establish a mother-daughter relationship. That did not happen, unfortunately, because my mother never dealt with her mental health issues. She never dealt with her grief, her trauma. So unfortunately, and with her, what I'm learning and observe, listening to the wrong type of, and I say the wrong type of people, meaning people who she thought was giving her guidance and she thought that was helping her, was actually causing more problems in the relationship versus talking to her child, her daughter about issues, or maybe seeking like counseling or a therapist to kind of have someone to help us establish that relationship that she did not establish for like those first, I don't know, maybe 11 years of my life, just maybe, yeah, 11, 12 years of my life. So it became basically like this expectation of having a mother around to be the mother, do the mother, do the mother, have the support of a mother. And a more like, I felt like I was like, she declared me her adversary. She was angry all the time. And
How did she declare you her adversary? What did she like say in those particular words, or was it more like action?
no,
Or
one of the theories I have, and I thought about this when I talked with my therapist in the past, was that, the whole thing was when she sent me to live down here with my elders, I was, sent here to live a better life. Therefore, you're living a better life. And I think there might have been some jealousy there, or maybe she felt like she was being left out. So I was sensing that could be an issue, and maybe her own frustrations and anger with her mother, my grandmother. From my understanding, my grandmother was an alcoholic.
the one who cared for you?
Right. And
Okay.
before she, sobered up or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And I think she had some anger that she may not have had. Like the grandmother I had was not the mother she had. So there's that dynamic. So when you're dealing with people who haven't healed from their trauma, this is kind of what I've learned, one of the things they do. They're projecting versus like having a safe space to do their own healing work. So she basically like was a bully and she took things out on me. I think to some degree, even just making like in her mind, I was like, she treated me like the world's worst daughter. And I'm just like, lady, I don't even know what your favorite color is. But not knowing back then she was battling like depression and, mental illness and all that, we just figured like, this lady's really angry. Just a really angry person, not knowing the impact. And then she's listening to the wrong type of people that she think is helping her versus we should have more likely been in a therapy session where not only we're processing the grief of losing someone in our life, we should have been processing the intergenerational trauma of the women, not getting along with their daughters for whatever reason. There's this weird thing. I realized that recently. My grandmother and my mother didn't get along, and my mother and I don't get along. But in my case, because I didn't I only grew up with like a certain time period with my mother, it was just kind of very awkward seeing this behavior from someone and having all these accusations and issues with someone that you really only been around for maybe 3-4 years. And it's unfortunate because when I look back, it's like, wow, this lady I've been around for 3-4 years, this person who's my mother, caused so much of like another round of trauma during my teen years. So I was already in a phase trying to figure out my grandmother's death. Mind you, the whole time, the only thing I had was like diaries, right? To write my diaries. That's all I had. Wasn't going to a therapist. No one said go to a counselor, nothing. We were doing this all on our own. And then, so from one issue of losing someone where the abandonment issue kicked in, now I have a parent who has trust issues and who's also dealing with her neglect issues. So she didn't trust me at the same time for whatever people feeding in her head or whatever. And then also she's so caught up in her past childhood traumas, she never healed. So she, instead of her saying, well, I want a better life for my child than what I had, it became more like, and she said this to my godmother and one of the neighbors in our old neighborhood. She literally said to them, I want my daughter to have it just as hard as I did. Yes, she did. And I know my godmother's from North Carolina, so she was fired up about that. Yes, she did.
So keeping all of that in mind, what did you feel, well, first of all, when did you find this out? Because did you find this out during your teen years or
Oh
while
yeah,
you
all
were?
this was my teen years.
Okay. So with that information that you had, what did you feel at that time when Mother's Day would roll around and people are making cards for their moms and at school and, saying, oh, we're going to go to Mother's Day brunch and all this other stuff?
Well,
What were
we didn't
you
do any
thinking?
of that.
Hmm.
You're lucky. She was lucky if she got a card, and then of course I had my mother, my aunt, my godmother.
You
So I
had other
had
mother
a network,
figures.
but I was like, "In no breakfast here. You're lucky you get a card." When my mother was in her, and this is where I learned about, I guess, mood. This now look back, it's probably even like a mood disorder. If my mother was in a good mood Valentine's Day and things are great, oh yeah, I'll give you a gift, like maybe a necklace or whatever, whatever. But if she was not in a good state, like again, you're lucky you get a card. Seriously.
Wow. So did you ever feel like an emptiness at all with
Not
that, or because
really.
you
I was
had
more
a support
frustrated.
system?
Like if you would say the emptiness, it would be missing my grandmother. Frustration is my feeling frustrated or anger would be towards my mother. Because I always knew back in my mind this was not normal, but I did not know it was a mental illness at the time.
You had a support system and you had love and you had
Mm.
nurture. So the mothering figure, you had plenty of mother figures. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah,
You had
but
like a trove, but
right. But the issue was during that time period, this was my junior high school years, because she kind of came in bombastically. It's like making a mess, unfortunately. It wasn't until like the incident, like me getting into high school, and even the people in my high school had to confront my mother about her behavior, to the point where they're like, she's either going to be with her dad, she's either going to live with her dad or her great aunt. Basically, was like, she's not coming back to live with you. So once I got her out of the picture in my high school years, I was able to kind of basically get back on track, flourish, the honor, be on honor roll, all that jazz. So that whole key thing, what really, when I look back, was I felt it was a good opportunity for her to be a mother that she was not able to do and she was not capable of doing. She could have been a good period during my junior high years to kind of make sure I stayed on track, got things done, and be able to move forward. But unfortunately, she couldn't do that at the level she needed to. So I was looking out at external things, like unfortunately, like the wrong type of relationships. I remember at one point too, the library was my sanctuary just to get away from the chaos at home. So, when you're dealing with in that situation, I guess like, already dealing with the abandonment and trust issues, things of that nature, you're going to seek out other things to kind of take you away from the stressors you're dealing at home. And even like sometimes in these relationships, they're not healthy, right?
I was just about to say, being at the library, that seems healthy to me.
Well, that
And
is
find
healthy, the
solace
library.
in a book.
Library is healthy, very healthy. I like to read, right? But
Right.
relationships were not
So
healthy.
let's talk about those. What kinds of situations did you find yourself walking into, looking back? What kind of situation did you find yourself walking
I
into
think I
based
dealt,
on trying to fill a void, whatever void
yeah.
existed?
I think it was trying to fill a void, trying to like, like girls do with like the guy, you try to hook up and find a guy, and maybe that guy will rescue you from the situation, that kind of thing. And then, looking back, it's like, the guys I've dealt with even back then had like more of emotional unavailability, avoidance tendencies, right? Even back then, like you can probably meet someone who's your high school, childhood sweetheart, whatever, get married and it's healthy. In other cases, you had no business being with them. There's no healthiness there at all.
Mhm.
So, and then again, we're also growing and maturing. So it's just all about just, you're lucky if you get a good pick, I guess, right? But I didn't really know about relationships back then. And like, it's just kind of just like what you see on TV, what you read. But it was not in my household, unfortunately, where you had that dynamic, because my dad was in New York. My parents had separated and divorced. So all you had was what you read and what you saw on, read in books and what you saw on TV, what you read in magazines, that kind of thing. But I did, for the most part, I do have a pretty good relationship with my father. Father's not perfect, but much, it was just, we just had a closer relationship, and I felt he understood me better than my mother, which I felt was for years was so ironic that it was easier for me to find a relationship more like my mother than my dad until I really had to set the intention to do that. And again, that's not perfect, but it was, better as far as, someone to be able to communicate with, if that makes sense.
Would it be accurate to say that someone who's more available?
Yes.
As opposed to someone who's keeping you at arm's length?
Or becoming like your adversary. Like in my case, unfortunately, some of the things, when I look back, it was self-sabotage. Maybe I've been self-sabotaging myself because someone was sabotaging me, right? So if you have a parent that's saying all these negative things about you, and you don't even know why, that comes in your mind, and then you maybe get out in the world and you seek that because that's what you're learning versus like.
What's an example of something that you were told that that now that you know was not true, but you operated as if it were true?
Well, the usual about, my favorite one, my mother would always say to me, why can't you be like your goddaughter? I mean, like your god sister, my god sister. Why can't you be like your god sister? And I'm like, where is this coming from? Because my god sister and I have such a different dynamic. And what I learned over the years that allowed me to kind of make a comeback at my mother in my 20s when she stopped, I just said, well, okay, let's see. My god sister had both her parents in her household. They know how to communicate with her. She trusts them. She supports them. They're not in an adversary role. So I was thinking all these things. So when my mother had said this to me after, like one day in my 20s, I had to say to her, I said, well, Mom, my god sister had both parents at home. And you should see her face, like you're talking about she was shocked. But I was like, yeah, isn't that a statistic they like to throw out that both parents in the home, there's not as many conflicts or issues. So I learned that was also a way I had to push back and set a boundary with her, because I was like, maybe now you need to look at you and have maybe a conversation with you and whoever, like your person or your therapist or whatever at the time. I was thinking like, maybe you need to have, that's something she needed to think about. So yeah, she paused. She never said it again after that day. So I thought that was really, really interesting.
Who decided to leave? Did she decide to leave your dad?
Oh, she decided to leave.
Amicable. She decided to leave. Okay.
And my parents had a long separation until my dad decided to remarry. I guess they took the cheap, like it was just cheaper maybe not to do a divorce until one of them wanted to divorce and remarry. So my dad officially decided to move forward and remarried in the mid 1990s. And then there was issues around that. My mother was like saying that my father sent her divorce papers. And I guess he's now going to marry that woman. And I'm like, well, y'all been divorced like 13 years. I mean, separated for 13 years. I'm like, well, he decided to move on, and why don't you do the same? Now, mind you, I'm saying this as a teenager. So now there's this parentification role, like the roles flip. And I'm just like, well, really? 13 years? It's like, y'all kind of waited a long time to do that. So to be separated that long. So dad moved on and, doing his thing, living happy, prosperous life. And some reason my mother, it was like this weird, bizarre, I always say I asked my mother one time too, I'm like, are you taking a vow of poverty? I just want to know, because.
You asked her that?
Well, because I was, this is the relationship we have, right? The dynamic, mm-hmm. Because I'm just like, she's smart. She has, like, I feel personally now at this point in life, like I'm learning when I was dealing with my emotional health, mental health challenges. I'm like, I choose to get well. I want to get well, and I will do whatever it takes to get well. And I wonder sometimes if my mother is doing this either out of fear or want to get more empathy points, right? She wants to, now you have to think about the whole thing around narcissism too, right? And I'm just like, I just don't want to give into that energy. I'm like, it's like I've been maybe not as long as she dealt with it, but I was more of a person who is very mission driven and goal driven. So I was like, when I went through my deep depression in my early 20s, I was like, I want to either I get better or you just die. Mm-hmm. Which one is it going to be? And I just said at the time, well, it doesn't look like nobody wants you to go anywhere, like to the other side. So, other choices to get better. So that's why I focused on doing just getting better and understanding mental health. And it also allowed me to understand my mother and why she is the way she is to this day. And I think a good chunk of it is either she's not getting the proper help or she just chooses not to get well. And that is a choice.
Going back to your depression, what do you think was the root of that?
Not being able, I held a lot of things in, kept a lot of things bottled in, my frustrations, anger. I think I felt maybe at times there was no one I can talk to.
Is this as a result of losing that core foundation with your grandma?
Well, that, and I think obviously, I think at a point in my life, I've gotten away because everybody kind of, when you graduate and everybody kind of with their separate ways, getting married, things like that. So some of those connections, they kind of just were lost. And when I realized that, even back then and even to today, I have to always get better at tapping into my network. I'm like, that's my resource. And I think what happened was, unfortunately, I had the wrong people around, like my mom, this whole thing of trying to build a relationship with my mom, and my great aunt was of age. So I wasn't really bothering her like that. I don't know. I mean, I talked to my dad, but I guess I have even when I was in I hate the word abusive relationship, toxic relationship, however you want to describe that. It's like, in essence, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I know this was not going to go anywhere. And maybe at the time I didn't want to bother people about it. I just figure eventually it may just, dwindle off or whatever. It did not dwindle. I had to like even get like law enforcement involved to structure boundaries. And that's when I realized how important it was to tap back into my resources and not talk about my friends. So my friends and my mentor from high school, my dad, the spiritual people I was involved with at the time, and then of course having my therapist, tap into those different resources to be able to get out and do what I need to do. But even with that, I had to even narrow that core even further down to like the people I grew up with. So I was like, I know this is my foundation people here. And that's what led me on the journey to start not only healing from losing my grandmother and the stuff I went through my childhood and my teen years, my mother, and being in the abusive relationship. It led me to like start this process and start seeing things differently, doing all the different, therapy assignments, things of that nature, to get to a point where I can get back into the world and be functional again. Because I was pretty much like to the point where I wasn't leaving the house. And I had a friend of mine whose mother works in mental health. They were concerned about me getting agoraphobia. And I believe I'm saying that right, when you don't want to leave the house. And then one of my friends from high school, she introduced me to the Sims game. And that helped me recover from the PSTD of all the traumatic stuff I dealt with in the relationship. And then one day I kind of just came out. It's just like you come out of it. You come out this deep depression. It was like, poof. I stopped seeing the events over and over again. It was like coming out of a brain fog. And I guess I knew then, I was like, you got to get back out here and get back out in the world and, live your life.
So when did the fog start? Did the fog start with your grandmother, or did it?
It probably did and came,
I think basically, I guess what I'm asking is that were you in a haze from the time of your grandmother?
It could have been. That's an interesting way to put it, because they talk about sometimes chemical imbalances in the brain. So I was wondering, it could have been a fog, could have been the chemical imbalance. It could maybe different periods of time. One might have been a fog and one might have been a chemical imbalance. I wonder sometimes, or like you just dealt with so much stress, it was, causing maybe its own variation of trauma with the mind or making your brain sick, basically. So, and then on top of that, my mother, when I went through that deep depression stage, my mother never told me she went through it herself. So it would have been helpful for her to tell us, like, this runs in the family. And I'm like, this is stuff I was saying to my mom. I'm like, these are the times when you need to be a mother. Like, tell your child about medical history. You can't sit there and be mad at everybody else for the way they raised me when you didn't even know your role yourself. So there's always been this theme with her about not taking accountability for her role not only in her life, but how her actions have been affecting everyone else. Mm-hmm.
Where are you in your healing journey?
As of today.
As of today, yes.
Well, I've been going through the breakthroughs. That's going to be a private conversation, but for the public conversation, it's just been like revelations, right? It's like, oh, this is why this has been going on this way, and it's been so many. Like I realized, some of the stuff I went through with my mother in my youth, watching how she inappropriately handled money. It's probably why you have some of the money traumas and watching them struggle with money, even though they were working class people, or they are, well, not working now, but back then they were working class people, but they always struggle with money. But the crazy thing when I look back at that is how much they would either struggle with money or they repel money. So when I say repel money, if somebody wanted to give them money, they wouldn't take it because I guess particularly my great aunt, because like I learned with my coach, she said, Jackie, that's pride. I was like, oh, I never thought of it that way. I thought she may have, I just figured she didn't want to be seen as a charity case. But then it's like 2 weeks later, you're like, we're struggling here and we need money to do this and that. And I'm like, well, didn't so-and-so, this person want to give you $50? And you said no. And of course, I'm like, take it, lady, take it. This is their way of blessing you. So it's crazy of this theme as I'm thinking about it, like the whole self-sabotage thing, how with us just not knowing, like, being open to receive things and watching behaviors of our family members or the people around us, how much we either sabotage or we're doing our own self-sabotage because of people not doing their inner work to heal. So you have, you have the emotional unavailability, you have the trauma, all these other traumas, the different emotional wounds, abandonment, neglect, trust,
Question for you.
It's wild.
Did shame play in any of this? Because to me, it seems like especially in the age of social media, everyone puts out their
because we didn't have that back.
Everything. Whatever, we sure did not. Thank God. Everyone puts out, I assume it's their facade. There's some people who put it out there the way it is, but everything is curated. Mm-hmm. And if there's the assumption that everyone is perfect, or at least not as imperfect as you, me, I'm speaking about myself. Well, they may not be perfect, but they're not as imperfect as I am. Did any shame play any role and kind of compound the sadness at all? And it's like, okay, I'm going through all this. Oh my goodness, I've been grieving my grandma for all these years. Okay, my relationships, they're not working out. Okay, my job, it's not what I want. Okay, I'm ashamed. Oh, and then this guy, he didn't treat me well. How did shame kind of weave its way into that?
Yeah. I think it kicks into a lot of us, especially having a mother who's telling you, why can't you be like other people? Mm-hmm. This whole thing, I think, with perfectionism kicks in. You're trying to be this great daughter, maybe niece, what have you, student. And then if you miss the mark, right, then that's the shame kicks in. And it didn't help growing up in a family rooted in the Catholic culture. That's a whole nother subject about religious trauma. We can talk to another time. But, growing up with that dynamic, it was problematic. And it was interesting, even coming out of the relationship back then, even the therapist had mentioned to me about how some of the guilt and all that teaching coming up from the Catholic culture influence how you felt. And I said, maybe that's why I don't identify as spiritual and not identify with a particular religion. But at the same time, I see good in the teachings of these religions or these belief systems, but I understand the harm as well. And maybe that's why I don't identify with a particular religion, even though I may, just by growing up, I was in the Christian culture. So that's something that would gravitate to me, but I may not embrace full the teachings. And I felt in my experience, it was used to control, manipulate, weaponize, had a sense of superiority. That just wasn't my thing that I want to have in a spiritual practice, being someone who embraces people from all walks of life. So I felt like even with that, I'm like, that didn't click with me because I felt like it was such like the superiority complex and you have to be perfect, right? You have to be perfect. And I'm like, well, that ain't me, ain't happening. But I knew I had a strong connection with the creator. And I've always known for the most part, the creator provides and protects for me. I know a lot of this, I say in the collective when I'm in interfaith spaces or multi-faith spaces or multi-belief spaces, I use the term universe because I don't know who in that room believes in what, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just look at it as like the creator. I know the creator always have my back, even when I may not make the best decisions, because in most cases, those decisions just become of your lack of knowledge or awareness. And I said, the creator always guide and protect me. And I could say I've been truly blessed in those things. And with the understanding you're not perfect, but you are, like I said, you can't expect perfection and imperfection. I, as a human being, is not going to be perfect. And that's just what it is. So I think with my mother doing all that stuff, I was trying to be the best daughter, the best student, the best girlfriend, the best. And granted, in some areas, in a healthy way, I am. I am. And I say that from the perspective of there's things that Jackie Fuller can do that most people on planet Earth cannot. It's just a fact.
Individual.
It's a fact. Yeah, it's just what it is. It's just like that could be my gift, right? And there's other things that in this earth, in this lifetime, on this side of in the world, that it is not mine to do. So I had to learn in my the hero complex. When is it good and when is it not good? When is it not good? You're trying to save and help everybody. No, everybody doesn't need to be helped, doesn't need to be saved. If it's preventing you from setting boundaries, that's a problem. If no one is, you don't go and help people with the assumption they need help, like you feel like you're rescuing them because they're a certain situation. If they do not come to you for help, you don't overstep that boundary to help them. But at the same time, you don't want to be a crutch, right? And
did you learn that from the boyfriends
to you, huh?
Did you learn that from the boyfriends? Not current one, but
not current.
Texas.
Not the current one, but past. It's just in the past. So, I've watched them do that in their relationships, and I was just like, okay. Now I'm looking back, I'm like, okay, this is what it is. They feel like they got to be these protectors, providers, and maybe and I learned that too. When you come from environments where you were bullied, there was abuse, verbal, physical, whatever. A lot of people, I caught this, gravitate to industries that are protectors. And I see this even in my interfaith space. I was like, yeah, because once upon a time I wanted to be in the Air Force. I wanted to be an Air Force chaplain, and it was perfect because it's like you can be a chaplain or go into like the weather side of things, the meteorology side of things. I didn't go that route because I got called into the interfaith space, and that's where the creator wanted me to be, and that's where I am now. But I did meet people in my interfaith space and even outside of interfaith space that I know they have this interest in protection. Like they want to go they're in the military, they go into law enforcement, or they want to be counselors, they're lawyers, they're all these positions where it's also justice seeking, or they're serving the public. So I find that interesting with people like us who have been in those past situations where they saw abuse, neglect, like those type of emotional wounds, or even like maybe trust, whatever it is. It's like we're drawn to roles, like even being clergy and things like that. So it's interesting to see how some people have channeled like their traumas into ways of where they can heal maybe their communities or the world. So it's interesting how some people take that approach. And then of course there are the others who don't heal. And then, they become the terrorists, unfortunately. They're causing all these problems. There's all these conflicts. There's always something wrong. There's this drama. And you're just like, man, you really need to deal with this. But in the meantime, you have to set boundaries with those people, particularly if they don't want to do the work to address their issues.
Oh, yeah, because grieving, it's solitary, but it's community oriented at the same time, because if you don't deal with your ish, then it's going to affect someone somehow. Yeah. What was the straw that broke the camel's back that made you say, you know what, Jackie, this is me speaking as you, if that makes sense. Jackie, you need to heal. whatever this is, you need to do whatever you need to do to be the full person that you were created to be.
How often did this come up? Because I think every decade was like something that kind of popped up. I think a lot of this stuff hit me when my life was getting better, but I would have a trigger. So I was like, there's something still lingering. And like I said, when I was in jobs that were not aligned with my values, I worked with career coaches and I worked with life coaches to get me to the point where I would be aligned with the profession that I wanted to be. And I learned that I still had some anxiety around taking that leap to do that. And during the pandemic, I looked back at my career in the nonprofit PR, digital space, and I was like, I pretty much plateaued. And I've always wanted to be in the broadcast meteorology world since I was like in third grade. So I finally made the switch to get into broadcast meteorology. I did that during the pandemic. The interfaith stuff has always kind of been like the calling. So thankfully, I just always had that interfaith thing to lead on for that as kind of like my North Star. I think I told you once I got over the issues with the unhealthy ex, start working over, getting over my fear of driving. And then that kind of, I think, ricocheted to the meteorology and everything else I wanted to get my fears over. And even when I started doing therapy again last year, well, actually, even before therapy, I did forgiveness work around my mother. Mm-hmm. And then in my current relationship, I start to have triggers again, but it was from the perspectives of loss, right? Lost in safety. So you're like, if this guy is good and you lose him, you're going to have these anxious feelings. But if he's like crazy and issues or this and that, the other, something that maybe you're missing here, then you're going to have this issue. So I was like, being the Libra I am, like, it's like that balance. Yeah. So I was like, and then, my friends and colleagues had suggested for me to go back to therapy, which I did. And I was able to place and identify those particular issues on why my exes were still haunting me. Right. And then like being who I am, being tapped into pop culture, I started to listen to songs related to what I was going through that helped me get to where I need to be, looking at the dynamics of, we talk about superhero therapy. I did something similar years ago around that kind of work, but it was more of a coaching perspective, but I reshifted that to more to the therapy side and like, what are the qualities of these superheroes? What do you like? They're not perfect either because they all have their issues. So I kind of went into that and did a deep dive even recently around that, kind of just to say, well, what am I missing here and how should I really process this? Which I did. I looked at She-Ra. She-Ra, I would say, She-Ra, Wonder Woman, and Storm are my top 3 superheroes. I would say maybe a lot. I like She-Ra a lot because of kind of the spiritual, metaphysical connection there.
But you wear a Wonder Woman ring.
I wear my Wonder Woman rings because definitely that deals with strength, definitely. But, that's the whole thing with perfectionism and learning. Even Wonder Woman have this like, her and her ideal perfectionism, people were still intimidated by her. She was like this grand figure of like everything I admire in, beauty, being smart, beauty, emotional, physical strength, health, all that. But yet, like I was reading, what was it, Spirit of Truth, the Wonder Woman Spirit of Truth a few years ago. And I read that comic book like in like maybe 2 hours. I just totally got lost in it. I figured it'd probably take me a week and I just took the day and just read it. And there was a section she was talking with Clark Kent, same thing kind of way I went through. It's like, wait a minute, I'm doing all these good things and I want to make the world a better place. And people are running away from me. People are afraid of me or, people are intimidated by what how I look, right? And all that stuff. And Clark had to remind her, like, you're not, she's not human. You're gotta be human and you're not human. So it's like, yeah, you're kind of like this grand, figure, but maybe you need to come down and be in the world, right? Be in the world. Like I said, be of the world, not of the world. Mm-hmm. Be in the world and kind of maneuver in that without being this like, just larger than life. I mean, that's who she is, but sometimes you have to kind of just know, you got to know what's going on in the room or know your environment. So I thought about what she said was she had her bracelets so that she could knock out landmines, whatever. She got this power, these skills, but she had to learn how to disarm a landmine just like any other human being that was in that space. So that kind of reminded me, like, and going to Shira is like, I can't be there to always rescue you. You're going to have to learn how to rescue yourself on your own. And that was an episode.
Talking about exes and romantic partners or
people,
friends or anybody.
Even in general, anybody, for real. Like, I'm not going to always, I'm not going to be always there to help out with a project. I'm not going to be always there to rescue you, basically. Mm-hmm. And then with Storm, dealing with my days of anxiety disorders, panic attacks, Storm's claustrophobic. So I compared Storm's claustrophobia to my anxiety disorder and kind of made a parallel connection and focused on how to overcome these anxiety issues. Well, the big thing is anything you avoid, you got to face. You got to face that, feel that fear and do it anyway. So anything you're avoiding, you got to face. Mm-hmm. And anxious, sometimes for me, at least, when I was anxious, I avoided. But then once I realized I was able to, I had a driving instructor that helped me do defense driving to build because he was basically like, Jackie, you just got to build your confidence. So I was like, okay, that's it.
Afraid of driving. Like, I don't remember.
Oh, people have driving anxieties.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Where'd that come from? Yeah. Was it an accident?
Same old drama guy. I hate to say drama guy because I fortunately attracted somebody like my mom. So I had to take some responsibility in the type of relationship I attracted, but I didn't know it was that, right? So he was super road raging and all kind of craziness. And then when he would get frustrated with people, whatever, when he starts yelling at the person in the car next to him, and be sitting next to him, and I'm just like, dude, what do I got to do with this, right? But like I said, back then I didn't know what I know now. Because in present time, as I told you, I will get out the car moving.
Yeah. And I don't know if you want to tell that story, but
I'm not telling that story. Okay. You're just basically saying I'm out. I'm like, I'm not, I'll get to the next stop sign, stoplight, open the door, I'm out.
Wow. If you had to tell anyone who was going through any type of anxiety, any type of grief, any type of loss, grappling with any type of loss or depression, or if they're feeling stuck in any point in life, what are like 3 top things that help you maneuver through life, having gone through everything you've gone through, having had that support taken away through death, having not had the support of your mom, but then you've had plenty of other areas of support, but still having to deal with navigating the relationships with her. What would you tell anyone who's dealing with any of these issues? Because you never know who's going through whatever.
Sure.
Whenever you meet people.
I just connected to like even stuff with the weather. Like life brings seasons. It just teaches you in some of our belief systems. Life is like seasons. You're going to have the happy times, the good times, the bad times, the rough times, war, peace, all that. So acknowledge that you are feeling this way. That's a legit feeling. However, I would also tell that person or individuals don't stay in that place because it's stopping you from moving forward, which I would say is next, have the courage to get help so you can heal. And doing that by going to a therapist, a counselor, someone who can fully help you in that journey, not people who you can who's going to enforce or encourage you not to heal, but to heal. You find those people, you find those resources, and then you do the work to heal and be consistent in your healing until you get to a secure attachment, and you're also able to detach that pain from that situation where it's a memory, but that negativity memory is no longer there because you're able to fully process to heal. And that has taken me literally up until 2005 to have I had various breakthroughs over the years, But the critical breakthrough for me happened 2024, 2025. So it was a long journey. But the one thing I did not do was be consistent. And a lot of that was due to, unfortunately, financial issues, especially with going to therapy and things like that. But I still always sought knowledge and just information. And I think when the time came and I was able to start connecting the dots with things in my life, it just, and keeping consistent with that next journey and healing, it was just like breakthrough after breakthrough after breakthrough after breakthrough, revelation after revelation. And yes, in this process of healing, you're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to have to face some uncomfortable truths about yourself. I had started also doing shadow work. That was really interesting. I'm doing that now because,
explain what shadow work is.
I'm explaining it from my way, but it's kind of like looking maybe at the alternative view, right? So, we all want to believe we're a good person, but you may have some not so, socially appropriate behaviors. Like I was thinking the book I was reading, I started working in the workbook. It asked the question, like, what do you not like in people? Like, what do you don't like about other people? Well, I don't like people I can't trust. I don't like people who lie, who have like maybe kill, various things. And then they will ask, how do you see those qualities you don't like in other people in yourself? And I was like, oh, I had to really think about that. Mm-hmm. But it was even prior to that, I had a dream that, and this is probably why my coach told me what he told me. So like with people who wrong me, that was that kind of one period of life where you want to get revenge, like I hope these bad things happen to them because what they did to me. Some people, thinking like that. And could you be in that position to actually seek revenge? This sounds a little like Batman-ish here, right? Vigilante. But you had to learn, like, that is not yours to do. Whatever these people have done in their life, that's why we have the teachings of the golden rule and reaping and sowing and, other traditions call it karma.
You might help them reap what they sow.
Reap what they sow. Life is going to get them. You don't necessarily need to necessarily be the one who does it. And you don't necessarily need to be there when it happens. And it may not happen in the same situation where it happened to you. It could happen in other ways. So I always felt like, don't be a doormat. Don't be a pushover with setting boundaries. Set those boundaries, protect yourself, because it is a reaping and sowing thing. If you don't want things to be done to you, are you practicing that in your life? And it could be any old kind of thing. It's just like, if you want to be loved, are you loving, right? Do you love yourself? How do you love other people? And if you're having issues of expressing love in a particular area with someone, particularly in a romantic relationship, you need to figure that out. Because if you want that person to love you, number one, how do you love yourself? And number two, are you fully present to express that love to that person? So you can't ask for something you're not willing to give yourself. Mm-hmm. And when you're in situations like that, you could step back and say, I think you're trying to figure it out, and you need to be able to process maybe why you can't do those things, even if you want to do them. That's something to think about. Like, I really feel like, it's self-love is important. Self-reliance is important. And, again, you cannot receive things you're not willing to do yourself or give yourself. Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you would like to add that I did not ask?
I mean, we'll be here all day if that, you know how I am. Journaling helps. Having the diary and journal helps. Journaling helps. If you do therapy, know your pace with therapy. I go my therapy appointments are like check-ins for me. So I do that twice a month just to make sure I'm staying the course. But I said, the more I have my breakthroughs, I'm like, I don't know, how long will I need to do therapy after having these major breakthroughs? Well, actually, I said, I'm going to keep doing therapy as I'm working through my money traumas, because I have goals of buying a home and, those kind of things. So I want to stay until I think I'm going to work with therapy till I'm solid with the financial, because that was the one that's probably was put on the back burner the most, like not buying a house, because you have to figure out your financial situation. Then you figure out the financial situation is also tied into some of these traumatic scenarios. And I was like, yeah, this is the next chapter. But I think everything else from what I've been experiencing over the last few weeks, I'm pretty solid in functioning and feeling more like my true self again.
Thanks so much for listening to Planet Noun, where it's all about the people, places, things, and ideas that teach us, prompt us to make a difference, and do more with what life presents. That was Jackie Fuller, one of the contacts in my media network. Life presents us all with loss, and every journey toward healing is different. Some paths are straight and narrow, and others take winding twists and turns. What matters most is the healing in this journey of our lifetimes. Where are you in your journey? Well, on our next episode, we'll have the story of a daddy's girl who lost half the definition in that phrase, daddy. And what's tragic is the way she lost him. She shares her long path in coming to grips with that loss and reclaiming her life. She also wrote a book about it, one that I've read and I recommend. That's coming up on the next episode of Planet Noun. Until then, take care.